views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
It's been a year since the death of George Floyd. On this edition of Perspectives, we take a look at the events since then, police reform, also equity, policies 1 year later. We also discuss qualified immunity and how the courts keep police from being sued over civil rights abuses. That, plus a whole lot more, on this edition of Perspectives with yours truly, Daren Jaime.
What's on your mind? Express what's on your mind. What's on your mind?
Anything relevant to life, you bring it to the table. Whether you make a move solo or a movement with a stable. No fables, you speak on your decisions. Cause in the long run, it's your voice, your views, your vision. Keeping it real with many messages for you to know. This ain't radio, but DJ runs the show. Entertainment, he rocks it. Politics, he locks it. The host with the most would handle any topic. Don't forget to share your perspective with shines of light. Cause it might make a difference in someone else's life.
Make a difference in someone's life. Express what's in your heart and your mind. Share your perspective.
What's your perspective? Let them know.
And hello, everyone, and welcome to Perspectives. I am Daren Jaime, and of course, we thank you for joining us. As always, you can watch Perspectives here on BronxNet's Channel 67. We invite you to stay connected to us on our social media platforms at BronxNet TV. Now, if you're trying to find me personally, my professional page, Daren C. Jaime on Facebook, and then Twitter and Instagram, DC Jaime 23. Well, it's been a year since the death of George Floyd. The conviction of Derek Chauvin, something a lot of people didn't think was going to happen, actually happened. The former Minneapolis police officer convicted on charges of putting his knee on the neck of George Floyd for what we now know was more than 9 minutes. Since then, celebration. Since then, jubilation. Well, why is there celebration and jubilation? Not because George Floyd died, but because the criminal justice system actually worked. It worked in favor of people of color. And now today, questions remain. A lot of calls about qualified immunity, about how to engage in police reform, about the George Floyd police reform bill that still remains a topic of debate in Washington. Here now to share more and give a little bit more insight, her reaction is a guest that we've had many times here on Perspectives. We welcome back community activist Joyce Johnson to the show. And Joyce, good to have you.
Thanks. Good to be back. It's been a long time.
It's been a long time, but I'm glad that we can have this conversation. And a lot has changed. Conviction in the death of George Floyd. Derek Chauvin, a Minneapolis police officer, found guilty for more than 9 minutes with the knee on the neck of George Floyd. Many people said it wouldn't happen. Were you surprised by the verdict?
I was surprised because we've never been surprised before. But when you think of it, so you can call it a celebration or no, 1 in a million justice served. I mean, I think about that and you know, the year anniversary. How many more deaths have we had since George Floyd? And how many have we had just in this last several weeks? And so this is a drumbeat as you think about it, Daren. 1 out of maybe 50. I mean, going back 20 years, there are people in Congress now, Lucy McBath, who was in Congress because her son was murdered and not held, the fellow not held to account. There are still since George Floyd in the last several weeks, you know, it has been discovered that, you know, police actions that of 2 or 3 years ago, murder. So 1 in many, okay, but that is not justice, full justice. That's not accountability for all those who have murdered or brought to account even before a trial. So it's good to have 1. I think we need to multiply that 1 times many, justifiably.
Right. Well, when we say celebration and jubilation, it's really a sad thing that we have to celebrate. Exactly. Because the reality is it was justice for 1, but certainly not justice for all.
Absolutely.
We see a lot of people still being arrested. We still see the videos that are popping up. We're finding out more and more people, questionable police shootings and things of that nature. But more importantly, following his death, we knew that there was a call for that George Floyd police reform bill to come and be passed in Washington, D.C. And yet and still, it remains stalled, much because of qualified immunity. One would say, after the death of George Floyd, qualified immunity should be something that should be done away with.
That is no question. If you're talking about real, I mean, have we had qualified immunity in any reasonable doubt? The point being, murder is murder, regardless of who has committed it. And in the Chauvin case, and others have been murdered now, is now becoming uncovered, and that we have a new administration and a new Justice Department that are looking at these things with a different eye. I say more towards equity and justice, colorblind justice. What's right is right and what's wrong is wrong. And so it is hard for me. I mean, it is not enough to have one out of 50, and God knows how many others are still being discovered and found out. And what it really goes to, a change in administration can mean so much, and yet, you know, on the current administration, the our Justice and Policing Act, the want to necessarily, if someone, regardless of their status and in with the uniform that they wear, if they have committed murder in uniform, there should not be any immunity. You and I could never. Murder is murder. But what it really says is that this goes back to voting in control. The Republicans are catering to a base. They want things to be the same. Qualified immunity is police protection where there should not be. We, the people, don't have that kind of protection. We don't have the benefit of the doubt by any stretch. And so what it says that we've got to keep the momentum. We've got to keep protesting. But we've really got to hold our local elected officials. That's anybody in your state and community to account. Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy have a hold on the Republican side of the House of the Congress, absolute hold. And those who, if it were someone else, would be for justice, would be for accountability, as they always are with us. They bring up a false equivalency of Black Lives Matter activists, with respect to January 6th. There was no such equivalency when Charlottesville was there. So I'm just saying, it all becomes a who represents you, who votes or does not, and that's our only power. The deck is stacked. There are many in Congress, Republican side, that need to absolutely be turned out of office. And their worry is that they know, in the face of the voter suppression laws now being acted in some 40 or 27 states, the only way the Republicans can win, let me say this, only way folks with this ideology of government and people can win is to make sure that the other side of the coin cannot win. And
Let me take a quick break and come back and talk with you more about this, Joyce. Where do we go from here? Given the fact that George Floyd's death is more than a year, yes, a conviction, no reform bill passed, but yet and still, the people still have a voice. We'll talk about that when we return here on Perspectives. And we're back here on Perspectives, continuing our conversation with Joyce Johnson, community activist. We're recapping 1 year after the death of George Floyd, a conviction, but still no bill. A lot of people still upset about that. Joyce, I'll bring you in now, and I'll ask this question. Where do we go from here?
We continue to protest. We continue to demand accountability. We continue to register to vote, register. We continue to engage community at every level. Then we look to hold our elected officials accountable. They know what's right as well as we do, and they know what's wrong. But we have ideologues in Congress, in state houses, who are, I won't say, are determined to keep a system in place that we have been fighting against for hundreds of years. And in the face of the colorization of America, and some folks just not having able to deal with that, black and brown, and the majority that we are becoming, that is that has them scared. And when folks are scared, they do evil things. And when they are in power, they can do that and get away with it. It is the case with the police just now being held to account, a Congress that are doing things that they would not never do in their real right minds, but they've got to keep power, the want of power, and dangerous things are done to keep it.
When we look at what goes on in New York City, and New York City could be a firm example of it. We hear the calls across the United States now for defund the police. To some, that's a little aggressive. To others, they feel it's the right thing to do. Where do you land in the conversation for defunding police?
I land in the conversation of reform police. You know what? In our communities, I mean, look out in California. Look at all of the mass shootings. Look at the shootings here in New York. So defund, I don't know. No one has quantified that. No one has put meat on the bones, like specifically do this, do that, and whatever. We can't defund anything because there are folks and who are lawless. There are people who do right, and there are people who do wrong, break laws, and must be held to account. But we cannot have a police system that is fundamentally that can get away with murder, that are predators in the communities that they serve. And so all defund is not in. Police who are just and right, who honor the profession to the extent that it can be honorable, and it was once. And if it were an all black police or all minority police systems, we would not be calling for defund. You know what we want: equal justice. We want anyone who does wrong things to be account. And so no, not defund, reform to a point where we have people in there who believe in their duties and responsibility for justice, and not predatory, and not angry, and not murderous, and not unequal treatment. That's what we need. Now, if the defund means demilitarize, yeah, because we go back to Ferguson where you saw tanks and whatever. That's what I'm saying. We don't need, tanks armed, police armed to where it's like you are in Afghanistan in a war zone. Our communities are not war zones. And so defund in that case in terms of armament, absolutely. But as far as police practices, equal justice under the law, equal treatment under the law, respect under the law for all, regardless of race, sex, gender, yada yada yada. That's
when you look at New York, you got to say, listen, we've got hundreds of billions of dollars in a budget, and it's the largest line item in the city's budget. You look and you say, why can't we take money from a department that is so stacked in the billions of dollars? And imagine putting $1 billion towards resources, towards
Oh
programs,
no,
towards
absolutely. Oh no, oh no, no, no. Then we have no argument. So if it's a case of you have too much money and you didn't, it's not serving well the job in the terms of policing and in terms of public safety, absolutely. You know, defunded the police. So it really is we're talking budget. Put the
right,
money in those areas where collectively there would be less crime, less violence, whatever. If our dollars and cents went to other places where folks could be cured from mental illness and joblessness and those things that might tempt someone to steal rather than buy because I don't have the money. Why can't I have what others have? And on and on and on.
right. Because there's an argument to be made. You put resources out there for people. You give people access to programs. You give people access to a better life. Then
Absolutely.
you can make better decisions. Now, I'm not going to say it's going to totally dismantle crime, but certainly when we're talking about young people that are shooting, young people who are engaged in guns, if we had that much money going towards youth programs, social service programs,
Or
things like that
education.
nature.
Exactly. So if you're talking about the amount of money we spend, yes, that's not defunding sounds like dismantle. We're talking about a misallocation of resources, our dollars and cents that could be put to much better use. Absolutely, absolutely, and that
Yeah.
and therein lies the so here we are in a democratic town, and if the police are funded like that at the expense of social services, at the expense of a better educational system, as or a youth there used to be a summer youth programs, jobs almost non-existent. So
Right.
the things that uplift a community and a system and not tear it apart. And so so the scale, the balance scale is out of kilter. Let's talk about putting that in shared resources that go for the common good, and that's not one-sided. But
Take a quick break.
I say I keep going about the language. The language of defunding supposes that defund and you let wild west. No, resource allocation where it works for everyone.
Well, when we talk about defund, I'm going to take a break on this one, but it's not pulling the plug out, it's turning the power down.
There
That's
you
simply
go.
that.
There you go.
All right.
That's a good
Let's take a quick break.
Yeah.
Come back with more with Joyce Johnson when we
Yeah.
return right here on Perspectives. Back here on Perspectives, Daren Jaime continuing our conversation with Joyce Johnson, talking about community, talking about policing, talking about qualified immunity, defunding the police. But let's talk about racial tensions for a moment. Because the question is, have racial tensions died down simply because of this conviction? Joyce, many people say immediately following the death of George Floyd, you had a shooting in Columbus, Ohio. We understand by all law enforcement accounts, that could be considered as a justifiable shooting. But yet and still, more stories of police, unarmed people, things of that nature. And the question is, where does it go with racial tensions now following the conviction of Derek Chauvin?
I can't say it's gonna. It's not. It's not less than, because that was one in how many hundreds, and certainly in the last several years, 50 or 60 or so. So the tensions are going to remain high, and with raised tensions, we have got to be more vigilant. We've got to be more forceful. We've got to go to the powers that be at local level, state level, the Congress levels to let them know that of accountability. They take our tax dollars. Our tax dollars fuels this government, and our tax dollars pays every elected official in this country. And it's like we have got to learn, because we have learned that when an employee is not holding up to their jobs, they must be fired. And we've got to make sure that happens, that happens. The power in Washington by the big lobbyists, the money, whatever. When Mitch McConnell can say we're not doing this and that, and he knows full well it's right, and all they want, it is a power grab, and that's the word that you're hearing more and more, to stay in power. Going off of a sidebar, talking about firing our employees, since it's so hard, it is time for term limits. It is simply time for term limits. That's off message in a way. That's another subject in a way, but it really is not, because the power of incumbency is so powerful. We know we know who the bad actors are. They can do and say the most outrageous things against we the people, all the people, but they remain in power. Something must be done. And that's one solution.
It's hard to even put it here, because we're just in 2021, but everybody set their eyes on 2022. We know there's going to be midterm elections, but with the state of the culture right now and the state of America right now, a lot of questions as to whether or not the Democrats will be able to maintain that majority in both the House and the Senate, and how Joe Biden is really going to be looking at an uphill battle in maintaining that control. A lot of people have said on the inside, listen, at best, Democrats have 2 years to be the majority. Do you agree?
I absolutely agree. And here's the mechanics of it. And here's where, the consequences on every level. We lost a congressional seat in the state of New York. Well, what was it? 69 votes, 68 paper, turn in the a census form. Now, that is outrageous. We lost a congressional seat. And how many seats like this did we lose around the country for the same reasons? That not enough people in, say, a congressional district that might look like us, a majority, not enough people filled out a form. Consequences. And we are elected officials whose job is to make sure that, we're talking about, across the country, how many of us we've got an overwhelming, I sit on the board of Higher Heights for America, and the number of elected officials, Black women in particular, our mayoralships, Congress, Senate, and yada, yada, all around. But the most important factor in distributing the electoral map, if you will, is the census. And so we lost one in New York, the great Empire State. We lost all around. Why? Because the same way we got people out to vote in massive numbers that scared the Republicans to a point of voter suppression, we did not do likewise for the census.
Very important. Very important.
Very
we got to wrap
important.
up. We got to wrap up between wrap this show up in a second. But I'll ask this question before we go. What do Democrats need to do to continue to maintain? Because obviously Republicans don't have a message except for get Democrats out of office. But what do Democrats need to do to maintain this balance of power?
We need to, going back to the point, at the state level, we need to run folks credible folks who can run and win for secretaries of state, the architects of voter suppression. This is all the power of this country is the one person, one vote. And so we can't not, turn on the mayors, the local sheriff, the police lieutenants or the police, whatever. At every structure, it comes down to, are you voting? Are you exercising? So we've got to rev up. So we had like 70% voter turnout in many places. Well, guess what we need to do? In the face of voter suppression, it needs to be 95%. That's the hard work of organizing. And we need people who are elected to understand you don't represent in Washington, D.C. or at the State House. Why? Because frankly, no one is doing anything. In Washington, D.C., they're both two sides are doing nothing but having meetings trying to come to some center. What they need to be doing back in their own respective communities, electoral districts, organizing and getting people registered to vote, to make a difference with the mayors, the governor, the attorney generals, the Congress, our Senate, up and down the line. That's the only way out from this mess.
Yeah. We got to leave it there, Joyce. It's been a great conversation. Definitely a lot to look forward to. We'll see how this all plays out, and we'll get your perspective again. So thanks for joining us.
I'll keep pushing it.
Oh, yes.
Thanks.
Well, thank you. And as we get ready to leave today, yes, a conversation about defund the police. Well, when you talk about New York City, there's some things we need to pay attention to. The fact that New York City has the largest budget of police in the United States of America. People say diversity, but let's talk about this diversity. Is there really a diversity in the New York City Police Department? The fact will remain that amongst the rank and file, there are a lot of people, diversity in the rank and file. But when you get to the top level, the chiefs, the people who make the decisions, the top 100 to 200 officers that make the real decisions, no diversity there. So when you talk about police reform, it needs to be on a national level, but certainly on a local one. I'm Daren Jaime. You watch Perspectives. We'll catch you next week. Take care. God bless.
Anything relevant to life, you bring it to the table. Whether you make a move solo or a movement with a stable. No fables, you speak on your decisions. Cause in the long run, it's your voice, your views, your vision. Keeping it real with many messages for you to know. This ain't radio.